Hi there and welcome to Studio SN. My name is Sara Naumann and today we're stamping and stenciling with Eclectica. Grunge paste and stencils are a fabulous combination for completely unique backgrounds, especially when you add in a little bit of acrylic paint and even some stamping, which is what I've done to create the background here on my card. Process is really easy, so let's take a look. The first thing I'm going to do on my background is add a little bit of pink paint just to knock back the white of my cardstock. Now the cardstock I'm working with is a textured cardstock. It's got a bit of a linen effect to it, so it's lightly textured, and that's going to give me a really neat effect. Now the paint that I'm working with is from PaperArtsy. This is the Fresco Finish Chalk Acrylic, and this is in Candy Floss. You can tell that I use this paint quite a lot. So what I'll do is just squeeze a little bit of the paint onto my craft sheet, and then I'm going to grab a brayer, run the brayer through the paint, get my brayer nice and painty, and then just run this onto my cardstock. Now, I don't want to paint the entire piece completely. I want to let some of that white show through, and then that way I'm able to get the white of the background as well as the texture as well as that beautiful pink. Then I just need to let this dry and I can do my stenciling. Now that my paint has dried, I'm ready to stencil. So I'm going to bring in my stencil, and this is one I designed for PaperArtsy. It's PS092. It's kind of like a distressed harlequin design. And I know that I want to position my stencil just straight onto my painted piece. When I get ready to stencil my grunge paste, I want it to go kind of across the center here. So I'm not trying to cover the entire piece. So I'm just positioning this down here, again working onto my craft sheet, and I'm going to slide it to one side so I have a little bit of room to mix up my grunge paste. And then I'm just going to use some masking tape to kind of tack this down so that it doesn't move on my sheet when I'm actually doing my stenciling. So a little bit of masking tape will do the trick here. And then I can mix up my grunge paste. Now grunge paste is a texture medium, and it comes in a really nice neutral color, which means that you can tint it with lots of different things. And I'm going to be tinting it with Limelight Fresco Finish Chalk Acrylic Paint. It's a really fun, bright green color. It's going to be a lot of fun to use this. And I'm going to use a palette knife for this. What I always like to do is kind of give this a bit of a stir before I pull some out of the jar. You can see the consistency of it. It's not really runny, but it's not super stiff either. So it has a really, really nice consistency to it. I'm going to get out a little bit of this using my palette knife and just put it directly onto my craft sheet. Now one thing to keep in mind, you always want to put the lid back on straight away and make sure that's on tightly, because grunge paste does dry pretty quickly, so you don't want it drying out in your jar. So now I'll just put a little bit of this Limelight down on here, and I can use my palette knife to make a really beautiful mixture here. So I'm just going to be mixing the two of these together. It's not really going to change the consistency of my grunge paste very much. It's not going to make it really watery, which is awfully nice, because then I can be a little bit more confident using this through my stencil so that I don't have to worry about that color seeping through in any of the areas I don't want it to go. So I've got this all mixed up here, and I'm going to use the palette knife to apply this to my stencil. So I'm just going to pick up a little bit of this on here. I'm going to hold this down, and I'm tapping on some of this color, just going across where I know I want my stencil design to be. So again, I'm not trying to get stenciling all over my background, but I just want it in enough places to make a really cool background pattern. And because the design of the stencil is imperfect, as you might say, it's a kind of a distressed effect, you don't have to worry about things being absolutely perfect. So I'm just going to put this across here and fill in some of these areas. I like to make it a little bit uneven, just take advantage of the unevenness of the stencil. And then what I like to do is just sort of scrape off any excess here. If I had another project on hand, I can still have some grunge paste that I can use for something before it dries out. And just make sure that all of these areas have enough color and texture through them. And then what I can do is just simply take off that masking tape and lift off the stencil design. And you can see that I have my stenciled piece. So I've got some really fun color and texture on here. Now I'm going to let this dry. It's not going to take too long to dry before I add my next step. While this is drying though, a really important thing, you do want to make sure to clean off your tools, your palette knife, especially your stencil, because if this dries, it will be dried and colorful and textured on your stencil, which you may not want. So I'm going to clean up these things, let this dry, and come back for the next step. I want to add a little bit more detail to my stenciled background, so I'm going to grab a black permanent ink pad, my water brush, some water in a mister bottle, and then my stamps as well. So let's start with the spattering effect that I'm going to do here. So I'm just going to take a bit of this black ink and put it onto my craft sheet, and then I'm going to add a little bit of water over here. I'm going to make a nice watery wash with this black ink, and holding my brush right over my stenciled piece, I'm going to do just a little bit of spattering on here with that black. And I think that having this angle go this way in contrast to my other angle of stenciling just adds a really nice bit of movement and color to my background. Then I'm going to let this dry for just a second, and I'll come back and do my stamping. Now I'm ready to add my stamping onto my background piece. And the stamps that I'm working with are the ESN 25 stamp set from PaperArtsy. And I resisted the urge to use the big collage elements on here. Instead, I wanted to put to use some of these smaller accent pieces, as well as the sentiment here too as my focal. So to add a little bit of background interest on here, once again I'm going to grab my black ink pad and one of the accent stamps on here. So I'm just going to ink this up with my black ink, and keeping in mind that this background is on a textured piece of cardstock, so I'm not going to get a completely perfect effect, which is totally fine. That's not the look I'm going for at this rate. But I'm just going to add in really just some extra accent pieces in here, a little bit more interest, and line this up like so. I've also got a smaller kind of a postmark in here that I want to add. But you can see, even though the stamping itself is not going to be as crisp as if you're working onto smooth white cardstock, it does give you a really cool effect on here that I think works really nicely with the overall look of our grunge paste stenciling. So I'm just mixing and matching these sentiments and stamps and patterns, top and bottom corners, just to create a little bit more balance and definition in here. And once I have this done and stamped as much as I want to, then I can stamp my sentiment and add it all to my card. So let me bring back in my original card and we can take another look at this. So I've got my stamping on here. I've got my stamped sentiment, which has been die cut with an oval shape. A little snippet of some painted cardstock. You'll probably notice the card itself, the base card that I am putting everything onto, has a bit of that limelight. I've just brayered the limelight directly onto my card base in a similar way to how we did the candy floss with the pink background. A little bit of baker's twine on here, and my card is already done. So this is how you can use grunge paste and stencils to create a really fun effect on your handmade cards. I hope you enjoyed today's show. Thank you so much for joining me on Studio SN. If you like this video, I invite you to subscribe to Studio SN on YouTube, and I'll keep you updated with a new video every month. For more ideas and inspiration, please stop by my website at saranaumann.com. Again, thank you for joining me on Studio SN, and I'll see you again next time.